Welcome to Early Adoptr, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. My goal is to cut through the noise and show you how this tech actually works for your business. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business. We'll explain what it is, why you should care, and how to use it without needing a computer science degree.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, grab your coffee, close that tab where you've been staring at ChatGPT for the past 3 weeks wondering what to do with it, and let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
This is Early Adoptr.
Welcome back to Early Adoptr, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. Jess, you've been all over the place lately. So tell us about your latest adventure.
Yeah, that's the understatement of the year. I just got back from the Cannes Lions, where it was hotter than the surface of the sun. Genuinely never been so hot in my entire life.
And it's only June. Crazy.
And it's only June. Oh my God. Honestly, that Mediterranean sun will fry you. It was pretty bad. For those of you who don't know, the Cannes Lions is like the Oscars of the advertising industry. It's a celebration of all things creative. Its full name is actually the Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity. And it's this huge event that's kind of sprung up around the actual festival itself. So the festival, the Cannes Lions, there's an award ceremony, there's a lot of panels, there's a whole bunch of things. There's something like 20,000 submissions for the awards. I only learned that this year. It's much bigger than I had realized. And it's incredibly influential in advertising. If you are a creative director who's won a Cannes Lions, you'll get a pay rise like immediately. It's kind of cool. But then also because of this kind of historical connection to the creativity, you also have this enormous festival or event that sprung up around it when it actually comes to the business side of advertising. So you've got all the ad networks, you've got all the media companies, anywhere that would have shown an ad historically, whether it was a TV network or now the social media networks, and everyone is showing off. So you'll have, panels with CMOs from every imaginable brand, from, entertainment brands all the way through to healthcare. And then all the platforms will be doing product demos. So I saw some really cool, exciting product demos, which I'll talk a little bit about. You've got giant parties. Like the scale of it is it takes over the entire city, and the locals must absolutely hate everyone. It's just enormous.
Wow. I mean, that's impressive. I mean, every time you tell me more about it, I have no idea it's this huge, massive thing that's happening in the south of France. But what stood out the most for this group?
For this particular group, in a surprise to absolutely no one, AI was everywhere. I mean, everywhere. It was actually impossible to escape. But kind of one of the things that we had predicted in the run up to this, after you and I had gone to London Tech Week and after I'd been to South by Southwest London, is that we're definitely starting to see a shift from the theoretical to the actual executions. So last year it was a lot of conversations about, this is what we could do with AI, and now we're actually starting to see this is what we are doing with AI. And something that you and I talk a lot about is people just need examples and they need inspiration, and so that's what we're starting to see. And once you kind of have an idea of what a brand is doing or what a business is doing, then you can kind of say, this is how that could apply to my business, which is obviously very cool. And then I also met some really exciting people, and I hope that we are able to have some of them as guests on the podcast. I certainly spoke to a lot of people about the podcast, so hopefully we'll be able to bring some of them on to talk about their various things.
Great. I look forward to it. And I also, that makes sense, aligns with what we've been seeing, the theory to execution. What were some of the big themes that came out of the conference, though, around AI?
So there were kind of three big themes that really stood out to me. So the first one was really, for ages, we've been talking about how AI is this, expensive enterprise level thing. But this year at Cannes, we were really starting to see a democratization of some of these tools. You and I talk a lot about how we feel very passionate about that and how that's a really exciting part of AI. And it's really cool to start to see it come to life. I got to see a lot of product demos, like I mentioned. In particular, I got to see some of Google's products that we had talked about when we talked about Google's I/O announcements a couple of weeks back, and they're so cool. Like particularly that clothing try-on, the virtual clothing try-on thing. It's just going to be game changing. It was amazing and so accurate, and it worked for any product as long as Google had a data feed for that particular product. So it wasn't just specifically limited to an Amazon partnership. It was millions of products across the internet. So it was really cool. Obviously Meta's talking a lot about their AI ad creation, so it's really just, you're really starting to see it come through now, where you've got these tools that historically the big companies, the big enterprise companies, were the only ones that had access to them. And now anyone has access to them, no matter how big of a business you are. And that is super exciting.
I think that's going to be game changing for, especially like Google, clothing try on tool. I mean, think about how massive that's going to be for users to have confidence that what they're buying from your store, if you run an online e-commerce store, that they know it's going to fit, which is always that, big concern. I know you were telling me the other day, it's like you only buy stuff in store because of that issue.
I do. It's very rare that I actually order clothes online because I'm just so fussy about how they fit. And so even to just have an idea of what it looks like before I purchase it is going to be massive. And then there's a really big conversation around the shift from SEO, which if you've been in the digital marketing world for the past 20 years, that's a pretty standard thing. And it's now moving quite quickly towards AI enabled search or generative search optimization. There isn't really like a definitive term for it yet. Everyone has their own version.
Someone needs to coin the term. Like we just need to know what to say when we're talking about it.
I know. I saw something the other day that gave, I don't know, like 6 different versions of it. And it's like, no. We just need to, let's just choose one. Absolutely. Especially for younger generations coming up. Like even, when I went to the Google demo, they demoed their AI mode, which I don't believe is available everywhere yet. I think it's only available in the US. But they're rolling it out, globally very shortly. But it's just much more of a conversation versus that very keyword-based SEO thing, which is what we've been working with for the past 20 years. So rather than saying, restaurant Cannes, it will be, I've got 2 people, we're looking for a reservation at 2 p.m. with a view overlooking the beach, and I want sushi, or whatever it is. So it's just going to be much more of a conversation and contextual based thing. Yeah. So it's still really early days. No one's quite figured it out yet. Like this is so early, but it's exciting. Well, you get in at the ground floor.
And also, I mean, I read something that OpenAI is testing out how to basically put advertisements within the search thing, which I think would be a huge mistake.
It's coming. I read something about how OpenAI were having meetings behind closed doors. Yeah.
It's where capitalism starts to win out, right? But
you can't run a business on $20 subscription.
True. Right. Yeah. There's a lot of ad dollars up for grabs there. I worry about how that dilutes the quality of the results you get back. So finding that right mix is going to be really important. And then obviously that massively impacts this generative search optimization. I've seen tons of tools popping up saying that they can solve this, but I think that's, again, the AI whitewashing, and we'll break that down a little bit. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
And then the third and final topic that was everywhere, which is something that we're going to be deep diving into today, is that everyone was talking about agentic AI, but generally they're getting the definition wrong. Even a lot of the so-called experts were using it in the wrong way. So we're gonna go deep into that today because everyone's getting it wrong.
Yeah, this is so important, and I'm really happy we're covering it today. The difference between AI agents and agentic AI is actually quite nuanced, which is why people are probably getting so tripped up. I think of them more as rungs on the ladder, building on top of each other. You start with tools that automate one task, then layer on reasoning, memory, autonomy. And suddenly you've got something that feels like it's working independently. And that gray area is where all the confusion happens. This is classic tech confusion. Two things that sound the same, share half the plumbing, right? But behave really differently. Agents follow commands. Agentic AI sets its own to-do list. That's one way to think about it. But there's no sharp cutoff. So people end up using the terms interchangeably.
This is the classic example of that AI jargon that you and I are always trying to avoid. It's very easy to get things confused. But it really does matter, because if you're buying or you're building or you're spending a lot of money on this stuff, you really have to understand the nuance and understand the difference, because the level of autonomy changes everything about it. So whether, how it's used, what it needs, and where the risks show up. And, we love to talk about the risks. And, agents really started to become a thing in January of this year at CES. That's really when they were announced to the wider public. And agentic AI as a term has exploded, and it's going to continue to be the big topic over the next couple of years. So it's super important to get the basics right on this one. But
Absolutely.
before we deep dive into agents and agentic AI, I have a crazy story to share. Do you remember that news story from a few weeks ago about Builder.ai?
That's the one Microsoft backed that was valued at over $1.5 billion, right?
That's right. So they claimed to use AI for app development. So, faster, cheaper, no coding required, blah, 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 all the usual crap. And it turned out they were not using AI at all, just 700 human engineers in India responding manually. Just wild story.
Classic AI washing, which we've now mentioned twice, which for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, this is marketing hype dressed up as AI.
Yeah, but here's the kicker, and this is why I wanted to make sure we told this story. I just realized the other day that a friend of mine almost got caught up in this. She signed up with them a few years ago, but got a really bad feeling about them after the sales process completed, and so she backed out. And her instinct really told her that something was off in this whole situation.
Smart friend.
Totally. Like, I remember having the conversations with her at the time, and I only put two and two together the other day. So congratulations to my friend, who definitely had a narrow escape with this one. And, a reminder, important lesson, to listen to your gut if a sales cycle feels good to be true, because it almost always is.
All right. So today we're diving into something that's been absolutely everywhere lately, as Jess just talked to us about with Cannes, AI agents. And as we identified, there's a lot of confusion about what they actually are versus what people think they are.
Oh God, yes. At Cannes, as I mentioned, literally every other word was agentic, but I feel really strongly about this. We have to be very careful with our words when we're discussing this, because you have to be correct. Otherwise, it's misleading. And as you'll find out, they're completely different things. So agentic isn't really the right phrase that a lot of people mean when they talk about this. So let's get into it.
Exactly. Let's clarify. Out of the box ChatGPT in a browser window is mostly reactive. It waits for your prompt, then it replies. But that same model can be wrapped in what's called an agentic loop, or an evaluation step. Once the wrapper can perceive its environment, decide, and act toward a goal without you prompting every step, then you've got an agent. So the language model is the engine. That's your GPT-4. It powers the behavior, but the agent is the full car built around it, adding a planner, a memory, tool calls, maybe even a feedback loop.
So ChatGPT or any of the other large language models alone is like an engine on a test stand. So it fires when you hit the throttle. But if you add on the steerings and you add on the brakes and the GPS, now you've got a self-driving car, which is what a real agent would be.
Perfect analogy. And I think that's the really important key. It isn't whether you're using ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, or any of these other tools. It's how much autonomy and scaffolding, right, that you give the model. So if you don't give it any scaffolding, if you don't give any structure, it's just a chatbot. Add in the loop and the ability to be, to feedback, now it becomes an AI agent. So here's where it gets kind of interesting. And I like to use this analogy, this ladder analogy. But if you think of the ladder of autonomy, and we'll probably use this over and over again, there's quite a few different types of AI agents that get more and more autonomous. So the really basic one, rule-based bots. This is just pure if this, then that. They operate on predefined scripts and decision trees, making them ideal for handling repetitive, structured tasks. A good example of this would be an e-commerce chatbot that helps customers track orders or start a return. It doesn't really understand anything. It just follows a flow chart based on the responses that are given to it by the person. The next level of autonomy is these task agents. They can finish a multi-step task workflow that you specify, like onboard this new hire. There's 4 concrete, discrete tasks. So the example would be a new hire agent that sends welcome emails, provisions an account, books orientation sessions, and then tracks the completion, all without needing human involvement, but it's not really doing anything based on the user's input. The next step is the goal-seeking agents. This is probably what we see a lot of, right? You give them an objective, like keep my calendar conflict-free, and they decide which tasks to run to hit that goal. So great example of this, although probably simplifying it a bit, but a self-driving car, right? It takes in real-time data, avoids obstacles, reroutes, and make decisions toward the destination.
But with that self-driving car, its ultimate goal, since it's a goal-seeking agent, is to get you from point A to point B. So it's very simple. I say simple very loosely, but that's its goal. And then you add in all those other things, the real-time data, avoiding obstacles, etc., and that's how it reaches that goal.
Absolutely. And then kind of the highest level of autonomy on these types of AI agents is the learning or adaptive agents. And to use this Jess analogy, this is where the car is making real-time changes to your route based on the data that's happening, the traffic information. So these agents do everything a goal agent does, but they evolve their strategy and the execution of that strategy based on feedback and new data, or as I always like to talk about, more context. So this is kind of the cutting edge, what people really mean. This is starting to get where AI agents start to get closer to what is agentic, or a system that improves itself and responds to feedback over time, somewhat autonomously or independently. But remember, this is still just an agent, so it's not completely independent. And we'll get to what the difference of that is in a little bit.
Yeah, so it's really, you have to think of it as a spectrum. So you've got your scripts where they just follow very pre-prescribed steps. You've got helpers, you've got goal-oriented helpers, and then you've got self-improving helpers. And that's kind of a very simplified version of the ladder.
Exactly. Most businesses today will live very comfortably in the first 2 rungs, rule-based agents and task agents. The goal-seeking and adaptive agents are really powerful, but as we talk about a lot, and I think this is very important for this group, they need tight guardrails and constant and clear monitoring.
That's right. So I think it's really important to dig into this a little bit deeper for the audience, because this can get a little bit confusing. So let's properly explain the difference between an AI agent and agentic AI, because everyone uses these terms interchangeably, and it genuinely drives me insane. I'm constantly correcting people in a really obnoxious way, and I'm quite happy to correct them in an obnoxious way, because it's an important distinction.
Yeah, and the gap between each level is small. We go back to that rungs on the ladder. AI agents exist within their own levels of autonomy, and agentic AI is now like that really next big step up on the autonomy ladder.
Yeah, and you don't need to memorize every label. Like, it's not like you're going to look at something and say, "Oh, that's a goal-oriented agent." We're just lifting the hood for you to understand, for you, the audience, to understand, so that when you build your own automations, or if you go to buy, some of these tools, the jargon feels familiar instead of scary. So, okay, Kyle, no pressure. Time to explain it simply. You can do it.
So an AI agent follows predefined logic to complete tasks. If we go back to our infinite intern example that we always talk about, give the intern a clear task with clear parameters and they'll knock it out they'll finalize or get to their objective if we give an objective-based agent. Agentic AI, though, that's when the system starts setting its own goals, right? So it adjusts based on what it's learned and starts to make more important and higher level decisions without you ever engaging with it.
So if we're sticking with our intern metaphor, an AI agent is like the intern who can complete full tasks to completion, but needs you to tell them what to do. We've all had those interns. And then agentic AI is like that intern who got promoted or is a little bit more experienced, and now they run their own functions because they can create objectives as they go based on the data that they're seeing. So they still need supervision, but maybe not. You can kind of let them go off and do their own thing a little bit more than you would with your, brand new intern who's still learning.
And you should absolutely provide that oversight as well, right? You
Yes.
wouldn't just have even your CMO, your very experienced marketer. At some point, you're going to have to monitor their performance. This, an agentic AI system is just the same. But to be clear, we should also distinguish this from traditional workflows or automations, which really are just business logic. This is, again, if this, then that, which probably feels very similar to the kind of very basic AI agent that we talked about. Those automations and workflows, those have been around forever. You've been using them within the current, your CRM or your existing SaaS tools for a very long time. But what makes agents different is agents can interpret, make choices, and act within the context rather than just follow a very distinct flow.
Yeah, and I've got a good example, which I think will hopefully clarify this difference a little bit more coming up. But right now, like the difference between a workflow that says if a customer emails about a refund, you send form A, which is very straightforward, very simple prescribed tasks, versus an agent that can read the email, understand the context, check the customer's history, and then decide whether to offer a refund, offer store credit, or escalate to. I saw a video that I sent you the other day that explained it really clearly. A workflow or an automation is really linear. It follows a set of pre-prescribed tasks. An agent is dynamic and it learns and changes over time. And I thought that was a really very easy, clear way of understanding the difference.
Yeah. And I'll give a really simple example. If you think about maybe if you're doing a marketing campaign, the automation or workflow would be, okay, this person comes into my website, completes a form, I send them a templated email, and maybe I input their name, right? That's an automation or workflow. We've been doing that forever.
Yeah.
The agent would be, okay, someone completes a form on my website based on what they submitted, based on their other website history. I create a personalized email for them that I think would match to what is interesting to them. And then I send that email. And then as they respond, maybe I do a follow-up email, again, based on the data or based on the response that person sent me. So it's much more like Jess is saying, dynamic. And the agentic version, so now where we go a little bit farther up on that ladder of autonomy, the agentic version would be even more sophisticated. It might notice, going back to the customer example, it might notice patterns in refund requests and proactively suggest policy changes or identify product issues before they become bigger problems. So it might actually start to change your refund policy or start to implement product changes. That's pretty future down the line, but that's how agentic systems start to be fully autonomous. So let me recap and break this down very simply. So workflows follow instructions, AI agents execute intelligently within rules, but agentic AI decides what matters and then takes action on it. So this is the colleague or the CMO with its own judgment making choices. And really, for most businesses, you want that middle option. Smart execution, something that feels personalized to your end user without the AI potentially going rogue and reorganizing your entire company. Okay, that's a little exaggerative, but the idea is you do want to have something that's being smart within a set of rules. I don't know that we're quite ready for that fully autonomous agentic system.
I agree. And I think there's still, there's some options for it so there might be some instances where that fully autonomous stuff is going on behind the scenes. So for example, if you're running an ad campaign on Meta, they probably have some stuff. In fact, I know that they've got some stuff going on behind the scenes where their AI is making, or their machine learning is making decisions about where best to spend your money in response to the data that it's getting. But that's not something that you necessarily need to worry about. You just let Meta do its thing. It's relatively trustworthy. You just let it go, versus, what Kyle is talking about, where you don't really want, your autonomous AI to make decisions about your business that you don't really, that you don't want to be doing.
Great example, Jess. We are seeing Meta ads, the performance of those ads being very volatile week to week. And I think that has a lot to do with what they're trialing their agentic systems to try to get the best performance. And unfortunately, some people are really struggling with some of the performance issues.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, we are their guinea pigs if you are running ads on Meta. Okay, so let's make this real for our listeners. Where are people actually using AI agents today?
Yeah, one of the most mature use cases right now is in sales and customer support. Think of support agents that can read incoming messages, classify issues, check your knowledge base or past tickets, and then send a full customized response, all within seconds. So it's not just routing the ticket to a human, it's actually resolving it.
Yeah, and in sales, we're seeing agents that can qualify leads, so make sure it's actually worth your time, book meetings, follow up automatically, and even generate tailored proposal drafts. It's like giving your team a digital SDR that works 24/7, no burnout, no delays, no having to pay them enormous amounts of money if they get a commission.
That's a great example because it shows how agents can handle multi-step processes. I will say though, if I have to read another LinkedIn post about like automated AI SDRs,
they're
I think
so annoying.
I think everyone needs to be a little careful around those.
Yeah.
They can be great, but it's not gonna, as we talk about, it's not gonna completely replace SDRs. Everyone is talking about them and showing these massive, decision trees and these big workflows. I think some of that is a little over exaggerated, and I'm not sure how well it works. I've tested out quite a few, and they're not as foolproof as people are making them seem. They are very clickbaity right now.
I absolutely agree with that. I feel very strongly about those automated. It's essentially cold calling, right? It's the modern version of cold calling, and I just don't think it works particularly well because people have cottoned onto it. People understand that you're lacking that personalization, that understanding of the individual businesses. But I can talk about that.
Yeah, this is a conversation we'll definitely get into, which is in a world where everyone is reaching out to you 24/7, how do you cut through that noise?
So for our audience of business owners and entrepreneurs, why should they care about this distinction between agents and agentic AI? Like why does it matter?
It's really about understanding what you're buying or building. Most businesses don't need or want systems that set their own goals, that agentic idea. And while it's exciting, it's still very early days. So again, going back to the LinkedIn clickbait, someone saying, here's your fully autonomous AI SDR. Is that really what you want? Or do you want someone who's reaching out, personalizing those messages for you within kind of the parameters of your business and the business rules that you set?
Right. Like I don't want my customer service agent like suddenly going rogue and deciding to give everyone refunds because it sensed that they were frustrated. I get frustrated with customer service people all the time. I want predictable, reliable execution of complex tasks, not something that I can't control.
Yeah, what most teams or businesses need are reliable agents that handle tasks within clear boundaries, faster, cheaper, and with limited supervision. That's where real ROI is today, I think.
Yeah. So let's use a real world example that I've been playing around with for a while. As you know, because my life is so exciting, I like to build workflows on the weekend. I find it very soothing. So, oh God, I can't believe I just admitted that.
That's awesome.
So I've been wanting to make a personal assistant automation for ages because I have like 6 different calendars, multiple different to-do lists, lots of different email addresses, and it just gets really confusing. And I've not loved some of the ones that exist out there, like Motion. I'm going to name and shame them because I just didn't, it didn't fit my use case. And it's really hard to keep track of everything. So I kind of followed our ladder unintentionally. So when I first started working on this a while ago, I started by making a workflow, and it was a pretty simple workflow. I hooked it up to Slack, and I asked Slack to, show me what I've got in my calendar today. Tell me what I've got on my various to-do lists. And that automation was used to, those questions were used to direct my query, essentially like a switchboard. But there were some limitations with it, because if you didn't ask the question in the right way, it would break and it wouldn't give me what I needed. So like if I wanted to add something to a calendar, but if I forgot to say add it to my early adopter calendar, it wouldn't go in properly, or it wouldn't give me what I was looking for, and the whole thing would break and fall over. So my next step was to then add an agent. And I use a tool called N8N, which is amazing. We will go much more in depth on N8N in general, and you don't need to be a developer. They have a pre-built agent that you can use in the platform. It's like a little agent node. So I added the agent, and when you set up the agent, you give it a prompt just like you would with ChatGPT or with Claude or anything like that. And because you're able to give it that very specific set of instructions, and you can be very clear about what you need it to provide and what it's a little more flexible. It's much easier for it to be able to direct the query. So I didn't have to ask it in that specific way each time, because it understood the general gist of what I was saying when I would ask it to give me my calendar, or, whatever the case may be.
It's that interpretation, right? Where it kind of interprets based on the objective you've identified and you've given it as part of the parameters.
Exactly. So it would, send, like if I asked it to add something to my calendar, it would send the email from my Gmail or from my Outlook or whatever it was on my behalf, scheduling a meeting like any normal, calendar invite would, but it wouldn't send an email on my behalf. It wouldn't learn to schedule things over time. It wouldn't identify tasks that needed to be added, or it wouldn't say, hey, you're overdue on this task, or, anything like that. It was just following that very specific set of instructions that I gave it. It was just more flexible because I was using the agent, and it understood and was able to put into context a little bit more. So the next phase, which would be the dream, is that would be agentic, so that my personal assistant would be able to learn over time and be able to pick some of these things up. So that'll be my next project. But that's just a really, hopefully clear, I hope, example of how it goes from, a simple workflow and automation where it's a little more limited, to using an agent, and then eventually for it to become agentic.
I think you identified something really interesting there, which was this kind of reactive versus proactive. So you said something about how the agent doesn't start to create things or notify you when it starts to identify patterns. That's the agentic. That's the next bit. Yeah. So the agent that you're doing is still reactive. It's still existing within the boundaries you've identified. The agentic would then move it to more of that proactive, where it starts reaching out to you to identify issues or gaps or things that you aren't setting within the boundaries for it to tell you about.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Okay, so before we go any further, we need to address some of the absolute nonsense that I am hearing out there about AI agents.
Oh boy. Okay, what's the worst one you've heard?
Well, I mean, last week at Cannes, everyone was claiming that they had agentic AI. And as we've been discussing for the past half an hour, just because you've got an agent doesn't mean that you are using agentic AI.
That's like calling a calculator an AI because it can add numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
So look, here's the litmus test. If it can't make decisions based on context and complete multi-step tasks autonomously, by itself, it's not agentic. It's just a bot with a marketing makeover.
And then, then there's the opposite problem. People who think agents are going to go all Skynet on us and start making unauthorized purchases or sending emails to their entire customer base. That is absolutely, something to be conscious of and aware of, especially as Amazon start to use agents for purchasing and
Mm-hmm.
things. It's something to be aware of.
But it is an important distinction. Real AI agents have boundaries, as we've identified. They're not autonomous. They're more like, remember those invisible dog fences,
Yeah.
right? You put like the little collar on the dog and can only stay within the ring. Well, the agent can run around and make decisions within the yard you've defined, but it can't go beyond that
Get
perimeter, I
zapped
should
if
say.
it'll get zapped if it does. But that's actually it's a great analogy because it's a very defined, perimeter, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so what about this idea that you need to be some sort of coding genius to use agents?
Complete myth, right?
Yeah.
And I think you can talk about this. I can talk about this as well,
Yep.
right? There are tools out there that we will deep dive into where it's literally drag and drop. I mean, you were talking about it, right? You've built agents, vibe coding in an afternoon or on a weekend. So I think if you can make a flowchart, you can build an agent.
Absolutely. Like I often joke about it, but I am the definition of a vibe coder. I, understand enough, and I know a bit of Python. I understand a bit of the data structures, but I'm not a developer
No.
whatsoever at all. And I use AI to help me build the agent of my dreams. I use Claude and I have a conversation with the Claude to make my agent goals a reality.
I think as we cover more of these topics, and definitely next week, we're going to be getting into more use cases, we 100% believe and are confident that this group, regardless of your, kind of coding or engineering expertise, can build an AI agent.
Yep. Okay, so let's talk about the limitations because not everything is, sunshine and roses in agent land.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, absolutely. We need to talk about where they fail, sometimes spectacularly.
Yep, absolutely.
The biggest one I see is agents getting stuck into loops. So an example of that would be you could have an agent built to negotiate prices with your suppliers, but it gets stuck repeating the same offer over and over because it couldn't recognize the supplier had already rejected it, or it wasn't taking in the context and the data of the response. This is mostly a problem with open-ended agents, especially those without strong tracking or feedback constraints built into them. I will say it's rare to see this in production systems, but this does happen if you don't build the system correctly.
That's a really painful one. And then there's our favorite hallucination problem. So like this is when agents just make stuff up.
The worst case of this that we've seen was a story from a few years ago. I don't know if anyone remembers this from the audience, but Air Canada was ordered to compensate a passenger after its customer service chatbot provided an incorrect refund information that contradicted the official airline policy. So the company tried to disown the chatbot's error, basically saying, "Oh no, it was the chatbot's fault." But a court ruled that Air Canada was responsible for all of its website information, very reasonably so, including
Absolutely.
its chatbot's responses. So this really highlights the risk of agents making up policies or giving misleading advice, and ultimately the company is going to be responsible for it.
Yeah, and that's exactly why human oversight is still critical. You can't just set these things loose and forget about them. You still need to have an element of control over it.
And obviously, that was a couple of years ago. Our sophistication has increased. Mostly this will happen if your agents aren't tied to your verified product data or your policies. We talk about some of the different systems like RAG or database-backed, agents. That hallucination risk is greatly reduced, but it's not zero. So you need to log and periodically sample an agent's response and check it. This is where I think for the audience, using tools and constantly monitoring these tools will help. You have to be careful with deploying off the shelf agents that
definitely.
are customized for your specific workflows or KPIs.
I think that is actually a really important thing to flag because I think often you're going to be buying something that's off the shelf. You're not going to be building something that's custom because, why build it if it already exists? But they need to make sure that they, that they understand your business logic or they understand your workflows, that they are really tailored to your business because otherwise you wasted the money, you're going to give up on them. You're not going to see the benefits of it. So it's very, very important to, if you're buying something, to make sure that it's tailored for you.
Yep.
And then here's another failure mode that people don't talk about. Agents can be too rigid. And I'm sure that we have all experienced this with customer service agents that have been programmed, to offer a refund for a defective product. If a customer complains that, their product arrived a day late because of shipping issues, and the agent keeps trying to process it as a defective claim, it's because it doesn't understand the nuance. So again, that's, something that there's a balance. There's a fine line between it being too controlled and being not controlled enough.
And that has a lot to do with the settings or the temperature that you provide to a lot of these models. Sometimes they can be too creative with facts and too rigid with logic.
It's a good way of explaining it.
So you really, if you're buying something off the shelf, test it. Look at a lot of those edge cases. That's where you'll find whether or not the AI is working in production. We talk a lot about how do you take a proof of concept, move it into production, and have it still work. Test a lot of these edge cases. That's when you'll understand if it's really working. I would say, as we've talked about, we'll go back to, it's why we covered it, one of our early episodes. Good prompt engineering can really help reduce a lot of this, or fine tuning your models, which is a little bit more of a complex concept that we'll at some point talk about. But, prompt engineering, fine tuning, referencing back your own data, that will reduce a lot of these issues.
So what's the ultimate takeaway here? Agents are powerful, but they're not magic?
Spot on. And they're tools that need monitoring, maintenance, and clear boundaries. So successful companies are going to be the ones that, understand the potential, but as we've tried to identify every time we talk about a tool, also the limitations. Start small, monitor closely, test those edge cases, and then start to scale as you see it working.
Yeah, and always have a human in the loop for anything customer facing or financially significant. The agent should be making your life easier, not creating new problems that you have to clean up. But it's a great one to use for low risk use cases like summarizing internal reports or booking meetings. They're already out there doing that successfully elsewhere. So it's a little lower risk and a good way to kind of dip your toe in the agent pond.
So for the next episode, we're definitely going to dig more into use cases and real world examples. And I think maybe be a little speculative on the future of agents and, as everyone's favorite term, agentic AI. All right, let's dive into some AI news. This week, we've got two stories that really illustrate why we need to think critically about AI headlines.
Oh, God, yes. So first up, you may have come across it. It was big news this week in the tech world. This fear-mongering MIT study that claimed that ChatGPT use leads to cognitive decline. Big headline across a lot of newspapers this week, and they're kind of missing the point entirely.
Totally. The study basically found that students who used ChatGPT to write essays without thinking did less thinking. Shocking. I mean, it's like, obviously, no.
There's a really interesting take that I saw from a professor at NYU called
Little call out, NYU call out. Love it.
Yeah. His name is Connor Grennan, and his take is really interesting. He called it the dumbest, most obvious research ever. And basically he's like, students will always take shortcuts. If you let them use ChatGPT to do their homework for them instead of with them, then of course they're not going to learn. Like, students always take the easiest way out. That's what they do. That's what they've always done. Like, remember those Spark Notes books recaps from back in the day?
Oh, yes.
You didn't have to read the whole book. You just read the Spark Notes, and that just gave you everything that you needed to know. You weren't thinking critically about it. You were just reading the book or reading the recap.
I remember them more than I should really admit. And we'll just leave it there.
Okay, then.
It's exactly like we're saying. If you use a calculator to do all your math homework, you're not going to learn math as well.
Absolutely. But I think what's really frustrating is that this headline is really sensationalized, and it's actually obscuring a really real problem, which is that we're not adapting our education system fast enough. Like, we can't keep giving students assignments where they can just copy and paste from ChatGPT. And, it's hard, but it's something that educators are going to have to adapt. And I am glad that I'm not an educator in this instance, because it's tough, and I don't know what the answer is. But I will just say that we're going to have to change the style in which things are done. You can't just keep doing it the way that it's always been done, because things are very different now.
Totally. As a little quick aside, we've hired our very own marketing intern. So shout out to Jack Wilson.
Hi, Jack.
But what we were talking about, his marketing curriculum he's currently a college student, and his marketing curriculum doesn't yet address AI or, how it's impacting marketing. So, 0 is definitely not the right answer. We don't know what the answer is in terms of how much to implement it, but 0 is definitely not right.
You can't just pretend that it doesn't exist, because as I can tell you, last week I was at the absolute hub of the marketing and advertising world. And, with every CMO and every senior marketer globally, we're at Cannes, and that's all that people are talking about, and how it's going to affect the industry. And you can't just bury your head in the sand and pretend that it's not there. So, as you say, giving them no information on it is actually doing them a disservice, because it moves quickly, and I get that it's a lot of work to be, changing curriculum to address it, but you can't just not tell them anything.
And it means graduates are entering the world completely ill-equipped to handle the tools that they'll need to be working with. Or at least it's providing a very different range of skill sets. To talk about Jack, he was saying that he doesn't use AI in any of his schoolwork, which is great, because as maybe the study properly points to, he's going to properly learn a lot of the curriculum. At the same time, there are people who are probably using it for everything and aren't learning anything, and are becoming overly reliant and dependent on it. But what I think is the issue is that there's just a big mismatch between those two groups. And so I think as we look at it, educators, students, we need to stop treating it like a threat and identify its best uses.
Absolutely, because, there are now companies out there that expect a baseline minimum awareness and usage of AI, and they won't even look at you if you've not got some level of familiarity with it. So again, you're just massively doing these kids a disservice if you don't at least address it. And I understand, the concerns around it, but by not telling them anything isn't the answer either. And, for any of the business owners listening, this is also a really crucial lesson. Like, the problem isn't the tool, it's how we use it. Don't let AI replace your critical thinking or critical decision making or your years of experience. Trust your gut. You use it to enhance and to augment your processes, not to replace entirely.
Yeah, as Connor nailed it, the problem isn't ChatGPT. The problem is how we're letting it be used.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings us to our second story, which is Meta's new AI app is causing some real serious privacy nightmares.
This one is wild. It's also it's funny, but it's also kind of devastating. So Meta launched this standalone AI chatbot app with a Discover feed where users can share their conversations, which sounds innocent enough, right?
Yeah, except the problem is people are accidentally posting incredibly personal stuff publicly. We're talking relationship advice, coming out questions, therapy, things that you'd normally only discuss with your close friends or with a professional. They added a social media element to it, which makes sense given it's Meta, but also I just don't understand their thought process on this. Like, why do your friends care to know what you're asking AI? Like, I don't care what someone's Googling. Why do I care what they're saying? Anyway.
Yeah, the crazy part, and I think part of that is the UI of it. Certainly, there's a mismatch between why would you want to, but the people started posting publicly. They just didn't realize the user experience like that they were posting. The crazy part is many users seemed completely unaware that their conversations were visible to everyone. And unlike ChatGPT or Claude, Meta's approach, blends that social networking with AI chatbots, which, to your point, you kind of have to ask why. But I think this is a perfect example of why data ownership is so critical. And it's something that is going to become a very big topic of conversation with AI as it evolves. When you use these tools, you need to understand where your data is going and then how it might be used.
Yeah. And, for businesses, we talk about this a lot, but this is a huge red flag about choosing which AI tool you should use. You always have to ask, what happens to our data? Can it be shared? Are there privacy implications? We talk about this a lot, especially in the ChatGPT versus Claude conversation, or some of the LLMs that are a little more privacy oriented. It's super, super, super important, especially, with last week's news about ChatGPT having to retain all conversations in that, New York Times lawsuit. Like, it's really key.
And unlike the MIT study, this is a real, immediate, today problem. People are inadvertently broadcasting their most intimate conversations to the world because they don't understand the platform's privacy model.
Yeah. So the lesson here is to read the fine print, understand the privacy settings, and maybe don't use the social media companies' AI tools for anything that you wouldn't want your neighbors to see.
Both stories really come down to the same thing: understanding what you're actually using and how to use it responsibly, whether it's students with their homework or people sharing their personal struggles. The tool isn't the problem. It's the lack of maybe digital literacy around these really powerful systems and the way that they're communicated and used.
Digital literacy is exactly the right phrase to use.
All right. Time for our AI Gone Wrong segment, our favorite segment.
It's my favorite.
And this week's story is equal parts hilarious, but also surprisingly insightful.
Yeah, I love this one. So basically, a developer decided to pit ChatGPT against the Atari 2600's chess engine from 1978, and ChatGPT got absolutely demolished.
We're talking about a system that costs hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to develop, getting beaten by a technology that has, I think it's 250,000 times less processing power than even your iPhone. So ChatGPT was confusing rooks for bishops, missing basic pawn moves, and completely losing track of pieces altogether.
I love it. And this is my favorite bit. When it lost, ChatGPT blamed the pixelated chess pieces for being too abstract to recognize. And then it kept asking to start over before finally surrendering after 90 minutes.
Gotta feel bad for old Chat there.
Poor Chat.
Poor Chat. So why does this matter for businesses? Because this is a perfect example of general purpose AI not being universally smart. We were just talking about it earlier. Just because ChatGPT can write great copy or summarize documents, or you can have a whole deep research conversation about market, doesn't mean that it can beat a 70s era chess pot. That's not what it was built for.
Totally. And, it's really ironic because computer versus human AI, chess matches have been going on since 1997. Like, I think if you're old enough, you absolutely remember what a big deal this is. The lesson isn't that AI is bad at chess. It's that you need the right tool for the job.
It's a great reminder. AI powered doesn't mean good at everything.
No.
If you need to manage your inventory, use inventory software. Don't duct tape a chatbot to the problem and hope that AI is going to solve all your problems. To wrap up this story, though, the funniest part for me is this whole thing happened because ChatGPT was trying to be helpful, but unfortunately overestimated its abilities, which, sounds familiar in some ways.
Maybe it was before that sycophantic update was taken back. Maybe it was just trying to be overly helpful. Who knows?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's wrap up with some actionable takeaways that you can implement this week. Kyle, what are the 3 most important things our listeners should do after this episode?
First, start building your AI vocabulary. Don't get caught in meetings nodding along when someone says agentic, but really means basic automation. Use our autonomy ladder that we discussed. Workflows, AI agents, and then you start talking about true agentic systems. So know which rung of kind of autonomy you actually need.
If you go into a meeting and you can tell the difference between AI agents and agentic AI, I promise you're going to be the smartest person in the room, or sound like the smartest person in the room almost immediately. What's number 2?
So number 2, pick one repetitive task that drives you crazy and build your agent around it. Just like Jess's example, whether it's email sorting or meeting summaries or social media monitoring, something internal and low risk that you have oversight over. But start small and, give yourself permission to be messy and just experiment on this one.
Also, if you're starting with an internal tool, it means you can learn without customer-facing disasters, and it's a lot lower risk. Number 3.
Audit your current AI tools. If you are starting to use tools in your business, you should audit those tools for data ownership and privacy and understand what you're maybe giving away. After that meta story, you really need to know exactly where your business data is going. Is it being shared? Is it being used for training? This is a very common one. If you're just using ChatGPT off the shelf, anything you give it can be used as training data. And if you can't answer these questions, you might be taking some unnecessary risks. So you definitely need to do that audit quickly. Next episode, we're going to dive further into examples and use cases for AI agents and walk you through some of the examples we've built so you might be able to start testing those internally and getting them to work for your own business.
Before we head off for the day, we need your help. Make sure that you follow us on social media. We are on at Early_Adoptr. And remember, no E in the adopter. On Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube. We're really, really starting to make the rounds.
Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review and on whatever your podcast platform of choice is.
And if this episode helped clarify the whole agents versus agentic AI confusion, please make sure to share it with other business owners who are trying to navigate this space. The terminology chaos is real, and we're all trying to figure this out together. Thank you for listening to Early Adoptr, where we help make AI your unfair advantage. And remember to keep innovating and stay curious.
Thank you, Jess. We'll see you next week.